close to being ready if we're not, so just want to make sure that everything is streaming on our end before we get started. So, good morning. Thank you all for being here this morning. Minot Police Department started to revisit some of the cases that we have pending, and as a result of that review, today's conference is about the 2006 missing person case involving Reachelle Smith. Reachelle was 3 years old at the time that she went missing, and it was just over the 15-year mark for the anniversary date of her disappearance. Before we get into details, I just want to explain that our hope is to offer closure for the families and the friends who suffer daily as a result of these incidents. Our hope is to help bring closure for them so they can continue to restore their lives in the wake of tragedy. That being said, today is about Reachelle Smith and her family. This is not about the Minot Police Department or the media stories that will run, but it is important that we work together to cover this information today and leave it in the past. We need to do that for the family so they can heal without constant reminders of this heartbreaking case that began 15 years ago. Today we will lay out a timeline and key evidence to show that Reachelle Smith was murdered in May of 2006, even though her body was never recovered. This case will be closed and no further investigation will be conducted unless some kind of compelling information would be brought to our attention or if her remains are recovered. To take these steps,
Microphone.
Nope.
Microphone, excuse me.
That's fine.
Mine, on the podium.
Not that one.
oh, this one?
Oh, there we go. All right. Hopefully I was talking loud enough. So I'll start back at, today we will lay out the timeline and the key evidence to show that Reachelle Smith was murdered in May of 2006, even though her body was not recovered. This case will be closed and no further investigation will be conducted unless some kind of compelling information would be brought to our attention or her remains are recovered. To take these steps, we had to show the following. 1, that there is compelling evidence to show that Reachelle is deceased. 2, there is compelling evidence to show that Lee Cohen was the sole suspect in this case, and he also died by suicide days after Richelle's disappearance. I'll now turn it over to Captain Jason Sumbakken, who is one of the primary investigators involved in this case. He will provide the timeline and the key evidence to show that the 2 points that I mentioned above were met without a doubt. I ask that you save your questions for the end, and we'll try to answer those as thoroughly as possible once he's covered that timeline. Jason?
Thanks, Chief. As the Chief said, we conducted a case review in regards to the Reachelle Smith disappearance from May of 2006. That review was comprehensive and it involved myself as somebody who was involved from the beginning of this case, and Captain Dale Plessis, who had never been involved and was a fresh set of eyes looking at the evidence which we had. As a result of that review, we came up with a timeline based upon the statements and the evidence and information that we had developed during the investigation of this case back in 2006 and going forward from there. I'm going to read, I have a timeline prepared. I'm going to read that timeline which kind of lays out our reasoning for the conclusion in this case. Going back to May 16th of 2006, Mr. Cohen, who was a friend of the family and who lived in the basement of the apartment that Reachelle lived in with her mother, celebrated his birthday. He goes out with friends and comes home intoxicated about 12:55 a.m., which would have been the early morning hours of May 17th of 2006. A short time later, approximately 1 o'clock a.m., Rochelle's mother goes to bed, and at the time, Cohen is sitting on one couch in the living room watching television, and Reachelle is sleeping on the other couch in the living room. May 17th, at some point in the night, a neighbor could hear Reachelle crying in the apartment and went to make contact at that apartment, but was unable to make contact. Short time later, the lights went out and no further contact was made that night. Early in the morning on May 17th, that same neighbor observes Cohen pulling back into the apartment complex with a family van. At that time, he was acting strange. He didn't make eye contact. He was trying to stay away from people, and he removed a red cooler and other items from the back of the van. The red cooler will be of importance later on. That's information that we had never released to the public. May 17th at about 10:30 a.m., Rochelle's mother wakes up and finds Cohen already awake and ready. She indicated to us that that was very unusual, as he usually was up all night and slept past noon every single day. For him to be up at 10:30 a.m. and dressed was highly unusual, and he was acting strange, different than his usual self. For the next 5 days, from the 17th until the 22nd, Mr. Cohen told several various stories about Rochelle's location. He indicated that she was with his mother and had been shopping in various other places up on the base here in Minot. And for the next 5 days, he told various stories as to her location. During that same time, a different neighbor observes Cohen, once again just going to his behavior during that time and how it had changed. He observes him going out to the dumpster with a bag of garbage and just acting very strange and standoffish, wouldn't make eye contact, and indicated to us that was weird, and then also referred back to the original person who had indicated those same behaviors to us. May 21st of 2006, Rochelle's mother and Mr. Cohen go fishing at the Upper Des Lacs Refuge. They fished for several hours, and on the way back, her mother insisted that they stop by the visitor center at the Minot Air Force Base because she was growing concerned about not seeing Reachelle and the stories that were being presented to her. At that time, they stop at the visitor center at the Minot Air Force Base and discover that Cohen's mother had checked out of billeting at the base, and had moved to Kansas to be with her husband, as he was retired from the Air Force and they were moving. At that point, they began to, Rochelle's mother began to panic. They tried contacting a family friend to find out more details, were unable to make contact with anybody that night, and continued that process until about 11 o'clock p.m. when they went to sleep. The next morning, which would have been May 22nd, at about 8:30 a.m., Rochelle's mother woke up and found that Cohen was gone with the family van. He left a note saying he was going for cigarettes and he'll be back shortly. He never returns. At that point in the afternoon, they began to become very, very concerned, as Reachelle hasn't been seen now in 5 days. And so they contact the police department and ultimately come to the police department to file a complaint for kidnapping and the theft of the van. On May 22nd at about 4 o'clock p.m., an Amber Alert is issued for Reachelle. Searches of the apartment, the area are begun. Photographs of the apartment, including a red cooler, which was found in the basement, are taken. Exhaustive searches throughout town, in the river channels throughout town, in the Upper Des Lacs Refuge area were conducted during those next few days, including the draining of a river channel in town here. May 23rd, Lee Cohen was found in the van, deceased, at the Upper Des Lacs Refuge of an apparent carbon monoxide suicide. We later verified that through the medical examiner's office that he had died from self-inflicted carbon monoxide poisoning. The hose that he used had been cut from the basement of the apartment where Reachelle lived and used to pipe the exhaust into the vehicle, which caused him to be deceased. May 27th, the red cooler, which I've been speaking of, was taken and sent to the state medical examiner's office. That red cooler at the time contained approximately 4 inches of what we believe to be ammonia, household chemical, and rags, which it appeared as if it'd been used to try and clean out the inside of that cooler of whatever substance had been in that cooler. In speaking with the family, that cooler hadn't been used in some time. However, there was fresh tracks that we could see going to the cooler in the basement through the dust. And once again, there was a household chemical that was in the cooler that seemed suspicious to us. The state laboratory examined that cooler and found a substantial amount of Reachelle's blood within the contents of that cooler, which led us to believe that something had occurred at some point which caused her DNA to be there. Once again, we conducted exhaustive searches through ATV, walking, canine, equine searches, divers. We drained a portion of the river channel with no success. In addition to that, 2 canine teams tracked from the apartment straight across the 16th Street to the river channel right across the street from the apartment. They tracked and located Reachelle's scent on that river channel in the same location. So based upon those facts and the fact that we determined later that Reachelle had never been with Lee Cohen's mother, the fact that we found her blood evidence in the cooler, which hadn't been used by the family in some time, and just his behavior over the period of the 5 days before he killed himself, we determined that there is no other explanation other than the fact that Lee Cohen likely killed Reachelle on the early morning hours of May 17th, 2006, and then secreted her body someplace where we still have not been able to locate that body. And when his explanation of her location began to unravel, when his lies began to unravel, that's the point in which he took his own life.
All right, so I think the one thing that I figured would be asked today is why 15 years later? And I think that goes back to the human aspect of all of us. And that's much like the parents, much like the family, we held on to some hope that there was some chance that this would end differently. But upon review, and the overwhelming evidence shows that that's not the case. It's time for closure for the family, for the community, for the department, so we can focus our energy on other cases that are open that we can hope to resolve in some way. So at this time, I would open it up to any question.
No, sorry, I like your point. You mentioned the Deluxe Refuge a few times. Did you mean the Upper Souris Refuge rather than the Deluxe Refuge?
Yeah, the Upper Souris Refuge, yes.
Thank you.
Although it's, closed at this point in time, I can't help but wonder how important were the days, say like the 17th to the 22nd, when she wasn't considered missing. How important could those days could have been, do you think?
Well, I mean, clearly those days could have provided us access to Mr. Cohen to get answers to the questions that we still have. But hindsight's 20/20, he was deceptive, trying to cover the fact that he did something. We don't know his motive. We don't know exactly what happened. We know the results of what happened. We can say those things pretty clearly now. But those 5 days would have been important for us just to be able to speak with him and and ultimately to determine what he did and where he placed her body so that we could have gotten closure for the family 15 years ago.
From your experience, is it more common that the more days that go by, the less chance there is of finding a body?
Well, I mean, if you just speak in terms of evidence deterioration and just the time, yeah, the more time that goes by, the less opportunity and less chances there are for us to find that evidence. That's not to say that it can't happen. It just becomes more difficult.
What are the chances that you will be able to find her?
I guess it's hard to, without knowing where she is, it's very hard to answer that question. I would hope that at some point we could, but I can't answer that question. It's been 15 years and we've not found her yet.
In the river, I suppose.
That would make it very difficult. And once again, he didn't leave us a letter or any indication what he did and where he put her. So that also makes it very difficult for us.
There was never any indication that anyone helped you.
No, there was never. We investigated that very extensively, and we have no indication that anybody else was involved other than Mr. Cohen. And that was important to this review as well, because the things we wanted to determine were, first of all, we entered this review with the intent to find answers, whatever those answers might be. But once we did find those answers, then we have really two questions to answer. Do we feel that Reachelle Smith is deceased? Yes, we do, based upon the evidence that we have. Do we feel that there was anybody else involved in this crime? No, we do not. We don't have any other evidence to substantiate any of that.
What I remember, the mother was actually a legal guardian. She was not.
She was a biological aunt
Okay. But
who had adopted Reachelle at birth.
did she legally adopt her?
I believe so, yeah.
What did the mom say about when the neighbor had heard the crying? Was she present in the home at the time? Did she have any insight as to what was going on with it?
I've spoken to her in the last few days. We've spoken with the family. And she wasn't aware that, she didn't hear any of that. So I guess
She in the
she was
house?
surprised that she hadn't heard that information until just a few days ago.
Was she in the house at the time?
She was in the house at the time. Didn't hear any of it. And that's,
So from her perception, she woke up and her child was gone.
correct. Yeah. She went to bed, like I said, at about 1 o'clock in the morning on the 17th. Woke up 9.5 hours later at 10:30, and Reachelle was gone at that point.
And then the mother of Lee Cohen was that a surprise to them that he had said that the girl was with them?
Yes, we actually had the FBI go down and speak with them and search their house. And it was a surprise. She hadn't seen Reachelle since, I think she said April, the month before. She had spoken with her son and had dinner with him a few days prior to his death, but had not seen Reachelle in approximately a month. So it was a surprise to her that he had said that. It was clearly he was lying to try and cover whatever he did.
Guess what he did.
One could make assumptions all day, and I wish I knew. I wish we could give those answers, but we ultimately know what the result of whatever he did resulted in Reachelle's death. But there's only two people who knew, Reachelle and Lee, and are unfortunately both deceased.
Could you speak just a little bit more about the DNA evidence found in the cooler? You said it was a substantial amount, but clearly not enough to determine that there had been a death involved.
So I don't have a volume. I don't know if that's what you're looking for. There's no way for us to determine a volume. But first of all, that cooler had not been used in quite some time. So there was no reason at all for her blood to have been in the cooler in the first place, because she hadn't been around the cooler. But the amount of biological substance that we found in that cooler was substantial. It was substantial enough for us to know that something bad, very bad had happened. More than just,
Like a cut finger
More
or
than
something?
just a cut on a finger, absolutely. And the location where it was found under the hinge, it was just, there's no way for those things to happen without something bad happening.
You said it was under the hinge?
The cooler, I assume, was big enough to hold the child.
It was a fairly large cooler.
And you said you have no motive for this?
We have no clear motive.
That became home drunk.
Yeah, it could be any number of things. We don't have a clear motive. Once again, only two people would have known that motive, Lee and Reachelle.
Do you have any other cold cases you're going to be focusing on now?
Well, the one case that we always have in the front of our mind is Anita Knutson. I think that is our only other open cold case as far as what we believe to be homicide. So, that this case, 15 years of holding on to some hope. I think for the family, they were doing the age enhancements, trying to come up with what does she look like now, and they're holding on to every piece of hope that this child's still alive, and I think to some extent we were too. And you talk a little bit about the DNA evidence, and in the time it takes to send a piece of evidence to the lab, depending on where they're at in their process, get that run, get a result back. I'm guessing he was already dead before we had a result. If not, it would have been really close. So by the time there was any determination of what the fluid was, that the blood was hers, that it would have been too late to ask follow-up questions about that. And that's the timeline. And some people might say, well, it's just kind of a quirky little catchphrase to say the first 48 on TV. But realistically, we get the best results out of focusing a lot of attention in the beginning of a case. And that's the approach on anytime we have a major case, a homicide. We try to get as many people involved right away to collect everything we can, because the more time that goes by, the quicker it deteriorates and it starts to disappear naturally, or people start to touch it, move it, whatever. So, we again, this is about Reachelle. This is about the family. The last, I guess, thing that I would comment on is during our conversations over the last few days with the family, they've asked that no media reach out to them. They're obviously heartbroken. They would just like you to respect their privacy and not reach out. They don't have any interest in talking about this case any further. So otherwise, any other questions before? Yes.
Was there any history or reports of Reachelle being abused or having anything like that in her home?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Complained about the Colin or father or anybody else?
No, I don't. There was nothing as far as history, there was nothing there that would be kind of that first clue. So it was just kind of a new development, I guess, if you want to call it that. But yeah, there was no history to indicate that there was any danger of this happening.
Thank you for closing it out.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for your time.